Resident Evil 3 Remake released on the 3rd of April 2020 for the PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and PC. As a follow-up to Resident Evil 2 Remake, it had a big shadow leering over it. So, how did it do? Well, let's compare the critical and commercial results just for a second. The original RE3 is one of my favourites in the entire Resident Evil series, holding the #1 crown until Resident Evil Remake stole it. And so, it comes as no surprise that when I first started my channel, I covered this game. So, why am I giving it another shot? Well, if you've seen that review, it's lacking. At the point of its release, I didn't script, I just sat down and recorded stuff, and then tried to salvage it in the edit. It's more like a ramble or a one-man podcast than an actual review. And as Resident Evil 2, 3 and 7 just got their next-gen updates, it gave me a perfect excuse to right the wrongs of the past, to give Resident Evil 3 Remake the review it deserves. Just to give you some context going into this, I feel like one of the only people who adores this game. Is it perfect? No. Is it better than the original? Hell no. But I think it stands on its own. Well, that was how I felt going into this. With more time under my belt and a more critical eye for the series, I plan to break down what works, what doesn't, and how expectations will ultimately decide whether or not this game succeeds. This review, as with all my others, will be split into plot, gameplay and presentation, and I will be going into full spoilers. So let's dive in. September 28th, 1998. 2 months have passed since the Spencer Mansion incident. The STARS unit have been dissolved following their damning report on Umbrella, and we find our heroine, Jill Valentine, at home. Suspended from the force, she's put the pieces together and vows to leave town and bring Umbrella to justice. Suddenly, she gets a call from Brad. Before she can ask Brad if it's hard pissing standing up since his dick fell off,
pussy,
she's rudely interrupted by Umbrella's newest bioweapon, and to make matters worse, it's European.
Bonjour.
After narrowly escaping certain death, Jill forms a tenuous alliance with the UBCS, the Umbrella Biohazard Countermeasure Service, with the aim to escape the city. The plot of Resident Evil 3 Remake is quite faithful to the original. As far as plot points go, all the main ones are here. You need to get transport online, it derails, Jill becomes infected, Nikolai reveals his true colours, and Carlos finds a cure, culminating in a final confrontation with Nemesis. In how it's told to us though, it's very different. So what did they get right? Well, for starters, the characters Carlos and Nikolai in particular have been overhauled to make their personalities shine. Nikolai is ruthless. He's the true villain of the game, acting as the physical representation of greed, which is ultimately what caused the outbreak to happen. He's the kind of bad guy you just love to hate. His motivations are simple. He wants money and will do whatever it takes to get it. And this sits in contrast to Jill. It's a tale as old as time. Create a protagonist and antagonist and have them sit on the opposite ends of the moral spectrum. And there's a reason for that. It works. I don't need to know why he wants the money. I don't want to discover he's got a family back home and this money will ensure he can cure his terminally ill daughter. I don't care. I want a Saturday morning cartoon villain who is evil just because. And that's exactly what we got. And I love it. Carlos in the original Resident Evil 3 was equal parts ladies' man, creeper, and total whiner. Here, in Remake, his personality is dialed up to 100. He's charming, dependable, and loyal. Watching his relationship blossom with Jill over the course of the game is a joy. It also helps. He has some of the best lines in the entire game.
hey, fuck this!
Resident Evil 3 Remake not only improves the characters from where they were, it also gives us extra time with them to forge these relationships. Nikolai pops up frequently to goad Jill, stealing the scene in every encounter, and Carlos gets a whole new section in the RPD. Speaking of, this section is incredible. You get to see what happened to Marvin, why there's a hole in the shower room, and you finally get the classic liquor scare. Tying it back to Resident Evil 2 was the best kind of fan service for me. It's short and sweet, seeing Kendo, blowing Brad away. It's all the things I didn't know I needed, and I really appreciate them. When it comes to the negatives of the plot, they steer more into gameplay territory. So let's move it on. Resident Evil 3 Remake follows the same gameplay as Resident Evil 2 Remake when it comes to control and combat, but in execution, it couldn't be more different. When it comes to the remakes, I think of it like this. Resident Evil 2 is modern survival horror, relying on item management, backtracking, and a permanent sense of dread, whereas Resident Evil 3 is a summer blockbuster. It's short, snappy, and throws a ridiculous amount of spectacle your way. Now there's pros and cons to this, but before we get into that, it's important to explain the vision I believe the devs had when it came to this game. Resident Evil 3, as I've stated, is all about Jill's escape. They funneled everything through this lens. Anything that could slow you down or impede your progress has been stripped out. Puzzles, long backtracks, the ammo creation tool, stuff that makes you think, plan, choose, it's all gone. The game wants you to keep moving forward no matter what. Further proof of this is in the dodge mechanic. It's been brought back from the original RE3, but here, it actually works, and it's essential. Enemies are numerous, way more than we had in RE2, and with Nemesis on your ass, you need a way to avoid hits while also looking stylish. By pressing R1 just before an enemy attacks, you can dive out of the way, and even pull up a gun in Max Payne style slow-mo. It's always satisfying, and performing multiple in quick succession makes you feel like a super cop. The benefit to this focus on momentum is the pacing. It's incredible. From the moment the game starts, it goes 0 to 100 and remains that way. And as such, it's fun from start to end. However, this does present its own problems. The one that I believe has the biggest impact on the overall experience is the lack of classic RE game design. So, what do I mean by that? Well, let's take one section from classic Resident Evil 3 and see what they did here in Remake. Getting the tram online. In the original Resident Evil 3, to get the tram working, you need to find 3 separate parts: a power cable, a fuse, and mixed oil. It's not as simple as go to these locations, collect them, and bring it back. Along the route you may need to find additional items or solve a puzzle to be able to procure the item you seek. It requires you to look at the map, to plan, to make a choice on what to do first and which items you'll need to take out with you to get the job done. To accomplish this goal, you'll need to do some backtracking, and that puts you in direct confrontation with Nemesis himself. Appearing in set locations, the illusion is created that he's stalking you, and with how frequently he pops up, it's an illusion which works just as well today as it did on its release. In the remake, to get the train moving, you need to turn on the power and plan the stops. The only obstacle in your path is the fire which needs to be put out. The city has so much potential to explore, but here, to accomplish this goal, you'll only need a short jog between locations. And out of these locations, the only one with any real character is the power station. After activating these, the game gives you a shining moment to see what Nemesis is truly capable of. His movement and damage output are next level. Your dodges need to be crisp, and you need to run. It's excellent, but as soon as it comes, it goes. And what you're left with is scripted moments of action, pocketed with boss encounters. The lack of classic RE game design relegates Nemesis to a more fixed approach. Without the need to explore and backtrack for large sections of the game, he doesn't have the opportunity to feel like he's actively stalking you, to feel alive. In contrast, take RE2 Remake. While you're in the RPD contending with Mr. X, you have to move from one side of the map to the other, all the while keeping quiet while he patrols. It ensures your paths will cross, and it always leads to panic. RE3 doesn't give Nemesis the same room to breathe, to create the organic terror that comes from player freedom, that comes from choice. It ensures everyone has the same base experience, one which is crafted for momentum and spectacle, but one which underserves one of the coolest enemies in the entire series. When comparing RE3 to its remake, there is one other design decision I can't get on board with: the lack of live selection. RE3 was the first Resident Evil game to have one campaign, so to add replayability, Capcom added live selection. During key moments in the story, two choices would appear, and you would choose one of these to move the story on. They could be as simple as choosing to fight Nemesis or to run, but some will change the route you take into new areas. It was a nice touch that added another element of choice into the experience. It gave you a reason to boot the game back up and see what would happen if you chose differently. RE3 Remake omits this, instead opting for a linear approach. Everyone will have the same experience no matter what, and the only reason to replay would be to hide the difficulty or to try and set new completion times. It's a damn shame. I'd love to chat to you guys about which route we took, or which choices we chose on our first playthrough. But no, instead, I know what you've done, because it's the same as me. I'm not even sure what the reason for this is. Were the team under time constraints? Was it a budget issue? Or could it simply be they didn't feel the system would gel with their streamlined plot? Who knows? Now, I could go on and on about content which I'd love to be here that wasn't included, the Dead Factory, the Clock Tower, etc. But I'm not really that torn up about it. I can see why people are. They are locations that, as a fan of the original, I'd love to see return. But for me, the bigger issue is the vision the team had for the game. A game which they want to ensure sticks to the story at the expense of giving the player choice on how it unfolds. A vision which simplifies everything to achieve breakneck pace. A vision which relegates Nemesis to all spectacle with no substance. Releasing only 2 years ago, RE3 Remake looked spectacular on its release. From the new character models to the city itself, it was a visual showcase. With the next-gen update, things have been improved across the board. There are now 2 options for you to pick: high frame rate or ray tracing. Both options are in 4K, with ray tracing targeting 60 FPS and the higher frame rate version targeting 120. Which version you pick is up to you. If you have a TV or monitor capable of displaying 120 FPS, then you may have a hard decision on your hands. But for me, I'm a sucker for ray tracing. I feel it adds so much fidelity to any environment, and I'm quite happy taking a hit on performance in the quest for beauty. With ray tracing enabled, entering the lab and seeing the light refract off the metals was enough for me to believe the game launched this year. It was sensational. Now, I'll level with you. I can't tell the difference between 50 and 60 frames if my life was on the line. As such, I've done my homework and seen the Digital Foundry comparison video, which I'll link in the description. They note a drop in frames to around 40 FPS in busy sections while using ray tracing. But to me, it ran fine. Again, that isn't saying much. I'll hold my hands up and admit to that. But as they say, ignorance is bliss, and I lapped up every moment of those sweet, sweet reflections. Now, I played the game through on the PS5, and as such, the other features included here are worth a mention. So here's what's included in the update. Near instant load times, 3D audio, adaptive triggers, and haptic feedback. The 3D audio is incredible. Capcom already had a great audio system on the game's release, but now it's even better. I use SteelSeries 7P Pluses when I play games, and by God I felt like I was actually in Raccoon City. It was immersive as hell. I wish I could say the same for adaptive triggers and haptic feedback. For me personally, I like adaptive triggers that make me feel like I'm in the game, to feel the tension in the gun as I pull the trigger. Games like Returnal or Call of Duty use them amazingly. Here, in RE3, you feel some resistance, and there is a noticeable difference between a grenade launcher and a pistol, but I'd have wanted it dialed up another notch. Add extra resistance when the clip runs dry, or have you feel the weight of the gun as you go to aim it. It's the little things that make these next-gen features sing, and in retrofitting them, it feels more like a tick box exercise rather than anything substantial. The big draw with these upgrades is the visuals, be that fidelity or performance, and from my experience, I have nothing to complain about in this department, but feel free to tell me how wrong I am in the comments. Moving on to the game itself, RE3 Original has for my money the best soundtrack in the series, and I'm glad to confirm that Remake pulls out all the stops to match this. From the incredible save theme to the end fight with Nemesis, every track stands tall. Mixing the old with the new into hybrid versions of tracks sends my nostalgia into overdrive. Now, I've included a number over the course of this review, and there's still plenty I could recommend. It's perfect. It's about that time we discussed the enemy and boss design. Across the game, you're going to encounter all the usual suspects from the RE2 remake. Lickers, zombies and dogs. And they are all as you'd expect. But there are some familiar faces that appear for the first time in these remakes. The Hunters. Two versions are included here. The Hunter Gamma with its grotesque mandibles, and it's capable of killing you in one shot. Uncovering the story behind their creation and Umbrella's termination of the program in favour of other models was a highlight for me. The sewers, where they are located, is over far too quickly to truly appreciate them, but for the limited time they appear, I enjoyed baptizing them in the fire. The second Hunter class appears in the hospital, the Hunter Beta. Holy hell, they look incredible, and they pose a real challenge when you take the difficulty up a few notches. I've always adored classic Hunters since their appearance in the Spencer Mansion, and I wasn't disappointed here. A classic enemy, updated for modern times. And that brings me on to my negatives. We've had two remakes now, and both of them have omitted enemies which are series mainstays, spiders and crows. Can you imagine how terrifying giant hairy spiders would be in 4K? I can. I've got arachnophobia. A money spider is enough to send me into a bloodthirsty rage. So increase the size to a small car, and my reaction will be something like this.
The thunder of my vengeance will echo through these corridors like the gust of 1,000 winds!
And that is exactly why they need to return. I want to bring them into this world, so I can take them away from it. The other enemy missing from the lineup are the crows. Them not being included is insane. They are everywhere in the original trilogy. Now I get it, they're annoying to fight. But that's the point. Put them in a mix with a horde of zombies in a liquor, and boom, you've got yourself a challenging area. Imagine walking slowly to get around a liquor, and suddenly you're getting pecked, alerting everyone there. I just don't understand why RE3 goes through the effort of adding pale heads, which are essentially zombies that can only be killed by heavy hitting weapons, when you could just bring back classic enemies to the mix. It's a total missed opportunity. Another own goal that I don't understand, the damage system. In RE2 Remake, enemies showed the damage you've unleashed on them. Here, you get bullet holes and an exploding head, but that's about it. The difference in quality is night and day. Now, it's not game breaking or anything like that, but it indicates a lack of time or budget offered to RE3 as opposed to its predecessor. Moving on, the bosses are all against the big boy himself, Nemesis. You square off with him in 4 separate boss fights, and they are all unique and visually striking. Each one has its own mechanics which stop them feeling repetitive, and the challenge presented by these really spikes up on the higher difficulties. Now, I remember running the final fight on Inferno for what seemed like hours till I finally overcame it, and the only thing that kept me sane was the sight of Jill firing the railgun. Just look at this. So badass, and such a great way to up the spectacle of a game which rides the lightning from the start till the end. Resident Evil 3 isn't a perfect remake. It's a short rollercoaster experience that will have you white-knuckling the controller for 4 to 6 hours. It's a game which distills what came before into the basest of its parts, an escape. If you go into this expecting a faithful reimagining of RE3, you're going to come away disappointed. But if you are happy to dive into a fresh experience, there's a lot of joy to be had. It's a departure from survival horror, leaving the puzzles, alternate paths and whole entire areas from the original and replacing that with pacing which just doesn't stop. Everyone seems to hate this game because of everything it's not, but I love it for everything it is. And that's it for this review. If you enjoyed it, put a like on it and consider subscribing for more Resident Evil content. Regardless if you love or hate RE3 Remake, I'd love to hear from you. I try to respond to everyone on my channel, so comment below and we can discuss it. Up next, I'm returning to The Evil Within to review the Season Pass content before moving on to The Evil Within 2. Thank you for watching. Take care of yourselves, take care of each other. See ya.